What happens when Hollywood's most humble star finally loses his calm and faces off against the queen of confrontation, television's sharpest tongue, on live television? What begins as a polite interview quickly turns into a verbal showdown that grips an entire nation. Accusations fly, tempers flare, and the calmest man in Hollywood finally reaches his breaking point. In those few explosive minutes, kindness meets cynicism head-on, and every mask in the room falls away. Because this isn't just Keanu Reeves versus Joy Behar, it's a battle between compassion and contempt, decency and ego, truth and manipulation. This wasn't just television. This was a reckoning between two forces that define who we are when the world is watching. Keanu Reeves walked onto the set of The View with that same calm presence the world has come to love. No entourage, no showy gestures. Just Keanu, dressed in a black suit, hair slightly messy, smile gentle and genuine. The audience broke into loud applause the second he appeared, their cheers echoing across the studio. He gave a small wave, a modest nod, and took his seat beside Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi welcomed him with her signature warmth, and Keanu talked about his new film, his love for motorcycles, and the small acts of kindness he tries to do in his everyday life. The audience listened, smiling. It was the kind of interview that made people feel good. Simple, sincere, human. But across the table, Joy Behar sat unusually quiet. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't interrupting. She was tapping her pen on her notepad, slow and deliberate, her eyes fixed on Keanu like a cat watching its prey. Everyone at The View knew that look. When Joy went silent, it wasn't peace. It was pressure. Keanu kept speaking, completely unaware that the tone of the room had already shifted. Then Joy moved. She leaned forward, interrupting Keanu mid-sentence. Her voice was sharp, but carried that familiar fake charm, half joke, half jab. "So tell me, Keanu," she began, smiling just enough to disguise the venom underneath. "When the cameras are off, are you still Saint Keanu? Or just another Hollywood actor pretending to care?" The room froze. Even Whoopi's smile faltered. The audience went dead quiet, their laughter dying in their throats. Keanu turned toward Joy, calm but focused, like someone trying to decide whether what he just heard was a question or an attack. After a small pause, he replied softly, "Could you clarify what you mean by that?" The way he said it, steady, polite, but firm. Joy didn't answer right away. She simply grinned and flipped through her notes, pretending to look for something. Joy leaned back in her chair, that sly grin spreading as she finally found her opening. She flipped through her notes for show, but it was clear she didn't need them. She'd been waiting for this moment. "You know, Keanu," she began, voice smooth but cutting, "you've built quite an image for yourself. The humble actor, the nice guy who rides the subway, gives away his money, helps strangers. It's impressive, really. Almost Oscar-worthy." The words landed like darts wrapped in sugar. The audience gave a nervous laugh, unsure if they were supposed to find it funny. Whoopi shifted in her seat, trying to move things along, but Joy wasn't done. "Let's be honest," she continued, her tone hardening. "You've turned humility into a brand. It's brilliant marketing, the whole down-to-earth movie star thing. You've done what most PR teams could only dream of." Keanu didn't interrupt. He just sat there listening, his face unreadable. When she finally paused, he leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped in front of him. His voice was calm, steady, and lower than before. "Joy," he said, "skepticism is your right. But cruelty isn't." It wasn't loud, but it hit like a hammer. The air in the room changed instantly. Even the audience felt it, That quiet moment when a joke stops being funny. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Joy broke into a laugh, louder than it needed to be. Cruel? Oh, come on. I'm just asking what everyone's thinking. She gestured to the audience, but no one laughed with her. The sound of her own voice hung awkwardly in the air. Keanu didn't smile this time. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. His shoulders were still relaxed, but something had shifted in his eyes. The warmth was gone. For years, he'd faced loss, pain, and rumors with grace, always taking the high road. But this was different. This wasn't curiosity. It was provocation. He sat forward, his voice quiet, but edged with steel. "You sure about that, Joy?" he asked softly. "Because right now, it doesn't sound like you're asking. It sounds like you're accusing." The words cut through the silence, sharp and deliberate. The audience stirred uneasily. For the first time, Joy Behar didn't have a quick comeback. She blinked, realizing she might have gone too far. Joy leaned in again, sensing the tension and pushing harder, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "You know, Keanu," she said, tapping her pen against the desk, "I get it. You've had a rough life. Loss, heartbreak, all that stuff makes people root for you. But let's be honest, your tragedy sells tickets. Let's not pretend it doesn't." The audience reacted audibly this time. A few gasps, a low murmur, even Whoopi's eyes widened. Sonny Hostin shifted uncomfortably, whispering something off mic, but Joy ignored it. She smiled like she'd just said something clever, not cruel. The words lingered in the air, ugly and heavy. Keanu didn't react right away. For a few seconds, he sat perfectly still. Then, instead of snapping, he gave a quiet, almost painful laugh. The kind that wasn't amusement, but disbelief. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but every word carried the weight of someone who'd lived through hell and chose not to drown in it. "You know, Joy," he said, eyes still fixed on her, "I've buried people I loved. I didn't turn that into a brand. I turned it into empathy." His voice trembled for just a second, then steadied again. The studio went silent. Joy's smirk faltered. There was no applause, no laughter, just the sound of breathing and the faint hum of the cameras. Keanu leaned forward, his tone sharpening now, the calm finally cracking. "You call it PR," he said quietly, almost like a challenge. "I call it surviving grief without becoming bitter. Which one are you doing today?" The words cut deeper than if he had shouted. Joy blinked, momentarily thrown off. For the first time in her career, the woman who built her reputation on pushing people's buttons had met someone who refused to play the game. He wasn't trying to outwit her. He was exposing her. Joy leaned forward, her face tightening as she tried to hold her ground. "You think you can lecture me?" she snapped, her voice louder than before. "I've been doing this for decades, Keanu. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, people who actually make a difference. My job is to expose hypocrisy, not to sit here and kiss up to Hollywood's favorite nice guy." She jabbed her pen toward him as if it were a weapon. "You've spent your whole career acting, pretending, and now you want to preach about authenticity? Give me a break." Keanu didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, almost curious, as if he were studying her reaction like a mirror showing her own reflection back. Then he gave a low, humorless chuckle. "No, Joy," he said, calmly, but with a weight that cut through her words. "You don't expose hypocrisy. You manufacture it." His tone was controlled, but there was something dangerous under the surface, a patience that had finally run out. The audience fell dead silent again, the tension so thick you could hear someone shift in their seat. Joy's smirk faltered for the first time. "Excuse me?" she shot back, You don't get to accuse me of anything. You come on my show, and you— Keanu interrupted, his voice sharper now, slicing clean through hers. Your show? That's the problem, Joy. You think this table is a throne. You think everyone who sits here owes you their dignity. You say you're asking questions, but what you're really doing is baiting people until they break. Her jaw tightened. You're way out of line, she said, trying to sound composed, but failing to hide the tremor in her tone. Keanu leaned forward slightly, not menacing, just certain, unshakably certain. You want to talk about manipulation? Let's talk about yours. His voice rose just enough to fill the space without shouting. You sit here day after day, tearing people apart because it gets ratings. You don't sell truth, Joy. You sell outrage. You've turned cruelty into content. You profit off humiliation? Joy laughed, a forced, high-pitched sound that didn't match her eyes. Oh, please. You think you're the first celebrity who can't handle a little heat? I'm doing my job. People want to know the truth about who you really are. Keanu's expression hardened. No, he said firmly. People want honesty. What you give them is poison, disguised as journalism. The audience shifted uneasily. You could feel the divide, some shocked, some riveted, everyone holding their breath. Keanu stood now, slow and deliberate, his presence towering over the table. The cameras followed him instinctively, as if drawn to the gravity of what was unfolding. How many tears have you caused off camera, Joy? He asked, his tone steady but searing. How many reputations have you broken just to feed the machine? How many people went home after this show, humiliated, because you needed your viral moment? Joy's hand trembled slightly as she tightened her grip on her pen. You think you're some kind of saint, don't you? She hissed. You're angry because someone finally called you out. Keanu took a slow step closer to the edge of the table. His voice dropped, calm again, but heavier, sharper. No, he said. I'm angry because people like you make the world worse and call it honesty. You think you're fearless, Joy, but the truth is, you're just cruel. The air in the studio went cold. No one dared move. Joy's face was red now, her lips pressed tightly together, but she couldn't find her words. Whoopi glanced toward the producers as if to signal for a break, but Keanu didn't look away. He was locked on Joy, not out of hate, but conviction. You tell yourself you're holding people accountable, he said, softer now, almost mournful. But all you're doing is breaking them down piece by piece, for applause. For a long second, Joy didn't respond. She just stared back, her eyes flashing between anger and something she hadn't expected to feel. Shame. And then, Joy Behar leaned forward, her tone turning sharp, almost taunting. You're angry because I'm right, she said, eyes narrowed, voice dripping with false confidence. The real you is finally showing. That calm, enlightened act. It's all theater. You can't fool everyone forever, Keanu. You can play the saint in movies. But this, she gestured at him with a small laugh. This right here? This is the truth. The mask is slipping. Keanu stood motionless, his jaw tightening slightly. The audience was dead quiet now, every eye on him. The red recording light on the camera glowed like a warning. When he finally spoke, his tone was low and cold, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. You mistake emotion for weakness, he said, but sometimes truth requires fire. His voice was calm but dangerous, like a fuse quietly burning its way toward an explosion. Joy tilted her head, smirking. Oh, please, she scoffed. You've made a fortune pretending to be deep. I ask one real question, and suddenly I'm the bad guy? Grow up. Keanu. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms like she'd won the round. But Keanu didn't back down. He took a step forward, resting both hands on the table, his eyes locked on hers. "You think asking loaded questions makes you brave?" "No," he said. "It makes you cruel." "There's a difference." Joy's grin faltered slightly, but she didn't look away. "I just ask what people want to know," she shot back. "Not my fault you can't handle honesty." Keanu laughed once, a short, bitter sound that sent a chill through the room. "Honesty?" he repeated. "Let's talk about honesty." He straightened up, his voice firm, his gaze steady. "Paying crew salaries, not PR. Helping strangers, not marketing. Caring, not performance." He paused between each statement, letting the silence stretch like a blade between them. "Tell me, Joy," he continued, voice dropping lower, quieter, but somehow even more intense. "What have you done for anyone without cameras rolling?" The studio went still. Joy blinked, the question catching her off guard. For once, she didn't have a rehearsed comeback. She started, fumbling. "I ask tough questions." "That's my job." Keanu didn't let her finish. He stepped closer, his voice cutting through hers, unflinching. "No," he said, his tone cold and sharp. "You ask cruel ones, and call them journalism." The audience murmured, the tension breaking into a low wave of whispers. Joy flushed, gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I'm not cruel," she hissed, voice trembling between anger and disbelief. "I hold people accountable. That's more than I can say for most of Hollywood." Keanu shook his head slowly. "Accountable," he repeated, almost whispering. "You don't hold people accountable. You humiliate them. You confuse interrogation with insight. You dress cruelty up as courage and call it truth." Joy slammed her pen down, her voice rising, brittle with rage. "Don't lecture me, Keanu. You sit up there acting like you're some moral compass, when you're just another actor trying to look virtuous." That was the moment Keanu's restraint cracked. He leaned in, his tone no longer calm but sharp, vibrating with emotion. "You think kindness is an act? You think compassion is fake? Maybe that's because you can't recognize it anymore." The air in the studio thickened. Joy's face flushed deep red, her mouth opening. But no sound came out. Keanu's words had hit something she couldn't deflect. He stood there, breathing steady, but his eyes burned with a kind of exhausted conviction. "You call this journalism," he said, his voice steadying again. "I call it cruelty, with a spotlight." He took a small step back, the tension so palpable you could feel it through the screen. "And you know what the saddest part is?" he added softly. "You think this makes you powerful. But all it does is show how powerless you really are, when kindness threatens you." In that moment, the power in the room had shifted completely. Joy Behar, who made a career out of controlling every conversation, sat frozen. And Keanu Reeves, the man known for calm restraint, had just turned quiet fury into the most devastating weapon of all: truth. Keanu stood silent for a moment, the air between them so still it felt heavy. Joy sat across the table, her confidence finally cracking, her eyes darting between him and the audience, as if searching for someone to save her. But no one moved. When Keanu finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost gentle, but every word carried the weight of something unbreakable. "You call this journalism," he said, his tone calm but devastating. "I call it the erosion of decency." The words sank into the silence like stones dropped into deep water. "You tear down hope because you lost yours long ago." Joy's face stiffened, the muscles in her jaw tightening. "You don't know anything about me," she snapped, but her voice was weak, stripped of its usual power. Keanu didn't respond right away. He just watched her, not with anger now, but with something closer to sadness. When he finally spoke again, his voice dropped lower, carrying a quiet intensity that filled the entire studio. "I've lost almost everyone I love," he said. "Friends, family, people who mattered more to me than anything else in this world." His voice caught for just a second, and the audience held their breath. "But I never used that pain to hurt others. I used it to understand them." The studio was utterly silent. Even Joy couldn't look him in the eye anymore. Her hands fidgeted with the papers in front of her, the same ones she had used earlier as props for her attack. They were just paper now, thin, meaningless. Keanu took a slow step forward, his eyes locked on hers, but his tone remained steady, almost mournful. "You see cruelty as courage," he said softly, "and doubt as wisdom." He paused, his voice growing firmer. "That's not journalism, Joy. That's spiritual decay." The words landed like a verdict. No shouting, no spectacle. Just truth. Raw and undeniable. Joy blinked, her eyes glassy, her mouth opening slightly as if to respond, but nothing came. The woman who had made a career out of talking had no words left. Across the table, Keanu stood tall, not as a movie star, not as a guest, but as a man who had finally said everything he'd been holding back. The audience didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They just watched, frozen, as Keanu took one small step back, exhaling slowly. It wasn't triumph on his face. It was release. A man who had spent a lifetime being calm had finally let the fire inside him speak. Not to destroy, but to expose. And as the cameras kept rolling, Joy Behar sat in silence, stripped of her armor, while Keanu Reeves, the man accused of being too good to be real, had never looked more human. Joy tried to speak, her lips parting, but no sound came out. Her throat tightened as if her own voice had turned against her. The cue cards in front of her trembled in her hands, the sharpness in her eyes replaced by something fragile, almost human. For the first time in years, the woman who could out-talk anyone on live television sat frozen in her own silence. The smirk was gone. The confidence was gone. What was left was a face caught between shame and disbelief. The studio lights reflected off her trembling fingers as she looked down at her notes, realizing they no longer meant anything. The laughter that once filled the set had vanished completely. There were no more punchlines, no more control, just stillness, the kind that follows when someone has finally been forced to see themselves clearly. Keanu slowly reached for his jacket, sliding it over his shoulder in one smooth, unhurried motion. The sound of the fabric brushing against the microphone was the only thing anyone could hear. He didn't look angry anymore, only tired, and perhaps a little sad. He took a few steps toward the edge of the stage, then stopped. For a brief moment, he turned back toward Joy, who still hadn't moved. His voice was soft, almost kind, but it carried a finality that cut deeper than any argument could. "I hope someday you realize," he said quietly, "that tearing people down won't make you whole." The words hung in the air long after he turned away. The cameras were still rolling, but nobody moved. Not Whoopi, not Sunny, not the crew behind the lights. It was as if time itself had paused to absorb what had just happened. Keanu walked slowly off the set, his footsteps echoing faintly against the studio floor. There was no applause, no music to fade him out, only silence, heavy, absolute, and more powerful than any standing ovation. Joy Behar sat still, staring at the empty chair where Keanu had been. Around her, the show's bright colors suddenly looked too harsh, too artificial. The audience didn't know whether to clap or stay quiet, so they did nothing. The only sound that remained was the faint hum of the cameras still recording, capturing not just the end of an interview, but the end of an illusion. When Keanu finally disappeared behind the curtain, the studio remained frozen, suspended in that rarest of moments. When the truth is too real for words, and silence becomes the only thing honest enough to fill the space. No one spoke. No one laughed. The air inside the studio felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were still trying to process what had just happened. The bright lights that once gave the view its familiar warmth now seemed harsh, exposing everything. The discomfort, the shock, the quiet awe. What had started as a harmless daytime interview had turned into something else entirely. A mirror held up to human nature. For 18 long minutes, America had watched kindness and cruelty collide in real time. And when it was over, there was no applause, no laughter, no attempt to smooth things over with a joke. Only silence. Thick, raw, and unforgettable. In the hours that followed, clips from the confrontation flooded social media. Some called it the most uncomfortable interview in TV history. Others called it the most honest. Viewers argued in the comments, half defending Joy for doing her job, half praising Keanu for refusing to let cruelty hide behind professionalism. But beneath the noise, one truth stood out. A man known for gentleness had finally snapped, and in doing so, reminded the world what decency actually looks like when it's cornered. Was Keanu out of line? Or was he finally right to fight back? That question echoed across millions of screens. But maybe that wasn't the point, because this wasn't just a celebrity meltdown. It was something deeper, a reckoning, a collision between cynicism and compassion, played out live on national television. And long after the cameras stopped rolling, one thing was clear. Keanu Reeves hadn't just defended himself. He'd exposed a truth most people were too afraid to say out loud. That kindness, in a world built on mockery, is the loudest rebellion of all. Was Keanu out of line? Or was he finally right to fight back? Because this wasn't just a celebrity meltdown. It was a reckoning between kindness and cruelty. Live on national television. Don't forget to like, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth behind the spotlight.